Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ananya Roy, Professor of Urban Planning, Social Welfare and Geography, and Director of the Institute on Inequality and Democracy at UCLA Luskin. Along with Christy Barrera and Jocelyn Gihama, I am delighted to be able to welcome you to a very special Election Day event titled Indivisible and the Resistance, featuring the work of Indivisible. Christy and Jocelyn wanted me to remind you that we have some sign-in sheets in each section, so if you would please circulate those, we'd appreciate that. The Institute on Inequality and Democracy launched in February 2016. We seek to organize knowledge to challenge inequality, especially the entrenched color lines of the 21st century. Through academic research and in alliance with social justice movements, we create scholarship, art, and collective action to tackle divides and dispossessions here in Los Angeles, as well as in cities around the world. In November 2016, in the wake of a presidential election in the United States that ratified xenophobia and Islamophobia and consolidated white supremacy, the Institute expanded its mission to build power and to challenge state-sponsored violence against targeted bodies and communities. In particular, we became concerned with the role of the university on the front lines of resistance. This event today, at the one-year mark of that fateful election, declares that places of teaching and learning will not bear silent witness to oppression and hate, that we will continue to teach, organize, resist. Last year, before the elections, a rapper called Nipsey Hussle, who grew up here, some of you are smiling, you know where this is going to go, who grew up in Crenshaw, here in Los Angeles, released a controversial but prescient song titled FDT, about Donald Trump. He rapped, "We the people of this country, we got a voice too. We will be seen and we will be heard." Indeed, we will be seen and we will be heard. This event is part of a year-long set of programs that the Institute has organized around the theme on race. Our intention is to highlight the deepening of racial inequality in the United States and to lift up struggles for racial justice. Today, we seek to understand the work of Indivisible as a grassroots network of local groups, over 6,000 groups and counting, that are building resistance, advocating for progressive policies, and holding our elected officials accountable. Built from the ground up in the wake of the 2016 election, Indivisible is now a hugely successful political force with national impact. There has been great excitement here at UCLA about this engagement with the work of Indivisible. In particular, I want to thank our campus allies who enthusiastically endorsed this event, including the Departments of Urban Planning and Social Welfare, the Bunch Center for African American Studies, the UCLA American Indian Studies Center, the UCLA Asian American Studies Center, the Institute of American Cultures, the Institute for Research on Labor and Employment, the UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center, the Critical Race Studies program at UCLA Law, and RAVE, Resistance Against Violence Through Education. I also want to recognize the student collective involving graduate students in urban planning, architecture, and public policy, which organized a brilliant course on abolitionist planning earlier this year and produced the Abolitionist Planning Resource Guide. Copies of this are at the back of the room. And I hope that you will continue to think about the work that they started here in our department on abolition. My dear friend Ruthie Gilmore, one of this country's most important scholars and practitioners of abolitionism, reminds us, and I quote, "Abolition is a totality, and it is ontological. It is the context and content of struggle, the site where culture recouples with the political, but it is not struggle's form." Ruthie says to have form, we have to organize. Which brings me back to Indivisible, to organizing. Our speaker this afternoon is Billy Fleming, co-author of the Indivisible Guide, which has emerged as one of the key manuals for political change in the United States, congressional district by district, policy topic by policy topic. Billy is also co-creator of Data Refuge, an international consortium of scientists, librarians, and programmers working to preserve the vitally important environmental data at risk of erasure during the Trump administration. As with several of the other core Indivisible organizers, Billy has had experience in DC, in his case working on urban policy during the Obama administration, including the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, which is now under attack by the GOP. But we especially wanted Billy to join us on Election Day because he is one of us. By which I mean he's a nerdy academic, or rather we're the nerdy academics and he's the cool one. He recently completed his doctorate in city and regional planning at the University of Pennsylvania. He has an undergraduate degree in landscape architecture from the University of Arkansas and a master's in city planning from UT Austin. Dr. Fleming is currently research director of the Ian McHarg Center at Penn. But as I often remind myself, urban planning is about remaking the relationship between knowledge, power, and space. And perhaps so is the case with Indivisible. After we hear from Billy, we will be joined by 3 distinguished UCLA colleagues who will serve as discussants and whose questions will set the stage for a broader conversation today. I will introduce them now so that we can move seamlessly from talk to discussion. Melanie Dela Cruz is the Assistant Director of the UCLA Asian American Studies Center. She serves on the City of Los Angeles' Human Relations Commission. Melanie is the lead author of the profoundly important report, The Color of Wealth in Los Angeles. Here in Urban Planning, we're very proud to note that she is an alumna of our graduate program. Laura Murad is Professor of French and Francophone Studies and Director of the Center for European and Russian Studies at UCLA. A prolific scholar and recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship, she was a journalist and art critic in France before taking up academic research. She might be the truly cool one. For those of us who are not fluent in French, for now we have to be content with the English translation of one of her many books, The Man Who Thought He Was Napoleon, Toward a Political History of Madness, published by the University of Chicago Press in 2014. Laura and I are both founding members of RAVE, the faculty activist group formed after the 2016 presidential election, I should say the feminist faculty activist group. And finally, Abel Valenzuela Jr. is Professor of Chicano Studies and Urban Planning and Director of the Institute for Research on Labor and Employment here at UCLA. He has also been recently appointed Special Advisor to the Chancellor on Immigration Policy. Abel's research has had a sharp focus on sociospatial inequality in Los Angeles, notably the book Prismatic Metropolis. He is one of the leading scholars of the political economy of day labor, as well as of worker movements and worker organizing in the informal economy. So let's get started. In an interview earlier this year, Billy Fleming said the following of the Trump regime: "I'm hopeful that the backlash against him will inspire a new generation of activists. many people will suffer unspeakable harm as long as he's in the Oval Office. The task before all of us now is to figure out how to be a good ally to those the president's policies will target, and how to sustain what will be a years-long battle to disrupt and dissolve his agenda. Please join me in welcoming Billy Fleming to UCLA.
Thanks, Ananya. That was great. Thank you for having me. I should correct one thing, though. I'm a really proud nerd, so don't mistake that with being cool. I'm not quite sure how to use this. Let's see if I can figure it out. There we go. So what I want to thank all of you for having me. I want to thank Ananya and the school for inviting me here to spend Election Day with you. I can't imagine a better place to spend Election Day. I'd love to be in Philly, like door knocking for my next DA, Krasner, and I'm hopeful he's going to pull it out tonight. But I absentee voted like 3 weeks ago, so I don't have to worry as much about that. I spend a lot of time in my School of Design trying to convince my colleagues and some of our students that this kind of work belongs in a School of Planning, and you've already figured out how to do it. So this is exactly where I'd want to spend my Election Day or Election Eve. So again, thank you for having me. Let me see if I scratched out some notes here that say things like Barr, Tom Cotton, and I can't even read what the last one says here, but I'm going to get to those in a second and try and make sense of them. And then I'm going to take you through some of these slides. I also want to say, because it's Election Day, we'll get to more of this in 2018, but tonight we have 3 former Indivisible group leaders who are running for office, and I think are all poised to win. Kimberly Tucker and Wendy Goditis in Virginia. So if you're paying attention to returns tonight, look for those 2 names. They're superstars. They're exactly the kind of people we want to model to other candidates in 2018 and beyond across the country. They're young, they're brilliant, they're not of the Democratic Party, even though they are running as Democrats, they're outsiders. They're exactly the kind of people who we need to be putting forward. And then the other, who has become kind of like a close friend over the last few months, is Hillary Shields in Kansas City, who's running for a state Senate seat and has faced about $900,000 in attack ads against her for a state Senate seat in Missouri, where Republicans have a supermajority and will, whether they win this seat or not. That's how scared they are of her, how scared they are of Indivisible, and how scared they all are of all of you who are showing up to support folks like her. So look for all of them tonight, and then look for many more in 2018. So I'm going to talk about 3 kind of general things tonight, and then I'm really excited to get into our conversation. One, I'm going to talk about our origin story, Indivisible's origin story, like how we got started. And the TLDR of that is that it's like one of the only things my parents were ever wrong about, which they used to say nothing good happens in a bar after midnight, and that's where we got started. So Mom and Dad were wrong about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about our evolution as an organization from a group of people who were running this bizarrely huge thing on our lunch breaks and in our pajamas at night, and also in bars, for about 6 months before we actually had anybody who was on staff and able to help us do this thing professionally. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what comes next, which obviously will involve elections, but involves lots of other things too. So yeah, let me get into this. And you can probably guess, this would not be one of our members, right? This is 2012. This is a Tea Party member. So when we got started, we really got started on election night in 2016. Ezra and Leah, who are our co-exec directors, and Sarah Dahl, who's our chief communications officer, were in a bar in Austin, Texas, commiserating over the returns as they came in. And we were all sort of texting back and forth. I just hosted most of the folks who sort of helped write the guide in Philly the weekend before to door knock. And we were now sort of via text message in bars all over the country, commiserating with one another over what was happening. And that went on for a couple weeks, where we were sort of, I think, in a state of despair like most other folks. And it was sometime towards the beginning of December that we began to sort of ask ourselves, okay, what can we do about this? What are the options available to us? What have we learned over our collective experience in DC and in elections and in politics that we think is useful for this particular moment? And we turned to a really weird source, which was the Tea Party. And we said, if you strip away all of the vileness of the Tea Party, right? All of the appalling racism and literal violence. And several of our folks who helped write the guide were staffers for members of Congress when the Tea Party came to power and were physically assaulted during town halls by members of them. So we said, okay, like, if we strip away all of those terrible things, like, what is it that made them so successful? Because if you look at the moment they came to power in, they were facing off against an historically popular president, a supermajority in the Senate, and a huge majority in the House, and they still ground most of what we wanted to do to a halt. And they did it through what Ananya just sort of intimated at the beginning, which is investing in good local organizing. It wasn't complicated. It got more complicated as time went on, and they got a lot of money and started doing lots of other things. But for the first year or so of their existence, it was just about good defensive organizing. And so we looked around and said, okay, we have an historically unpopular president who's also mostly incompetent, and we have a razor-thin majority in the Senate and a razor-thin majority in the House. Why can't we do the same thing to them that they did to us? And that's, what that is pretty much saying there. So most of you, well, does anybody here read the original Google Doc? Yeah, a couple of you. I'm actually glad it's only a few of you, because that thing was such a mess. One of my jobs was, because I'm in a design school, I think they expected me to be able to like proofread it and make it attractive, and I failed at like all of that stuff. There's like 30 spelling errors in it. There's all kinds of grammatical mistakes. It looks like my 7-year-old nephew put it together. But we all sort of, we put all of our ideas together after we finished our time in those bar rooms and like thinking about what it was that we could offer. And we said, okay, like, let's just put this in a Google Doc. We'll try to write it in like a funny, compelling way. And we'll hope that our friends who are coming off the campaign and looking for something to do will find it useful. And like our highest ambition was that we'd put it on Facebook or Twitter, and like our moms would like it or our dads would retweet it or something, and that would be it. And like that happened. But then we also sort of watched in amazement as all kinds of other people picked this thing up and ran with it. And the first night that it went live, which I think was December 14th, yeah, I have it on there. Like it went, we sat there all sort of in amazement and watched as it went from, the 15 or 20 of us who wrote it, reading it, to like 100 people, to like 1,000, to 10,000, to then the document crashing, which we didn't know Google Docs could do, but that's how we found out. I think George Takei retweeted it, and that was like the end of us being able to use it. And the roadmap we laid out wasn't complicated, right? Like, we get a lot of credit for a lot of stuff, and most of it, like, we either don't deserve or it's not complicated and people were doing already. We were in the right place at the right time, and I think made our information accessible in new ways. But a lot of this is like old wine in new bottles, right? So we looked at a two-pronged strategy for how to deal with all of this, which mostly involved local activism. And most of that tied back to the fact that for most members of Congress, and not all members of Congress, there are only three things they care about, right? That's re-election, re-election, and re-election. And the way they control that process is by controlling the way they're framed in their local media. And that's partially true in big cities like Philly and like LA and like San Francisco, but it's especially true in some of the bigger rural districts. I'm from Arkansas, so I'm going to talk about Arkansas a lot tonight, so just prepare yourselves for that. But in places like that where there's one statewide newspaper, like, it is really easy for someone to control the way a member of Congress is framed. And so one of the things we wanted to offer our groups is an ability to intercede and to inflect the way that member is perceived. And we wanted to give people a way in this document and through other means that I'll get to in just a second to identify their group, right? So it wasn't just you or me or whoever doing this in isolation at home or taking a lunch break solo to go to your member of Congress's office, but to be able to show up in force and to project the power that you and all of your friends and your community members have in influencing the way your member of Congress thinks. And then we sort of created a hierarchy for action, right? So having worked and spent quite a bit of time on the Hill, for most of our folks who helped write this thing, we knew that there were certain ways of communicating with members of Congress that would get their attention, and certain ways that wouldn't. Doesn't mean they're not worth doing. Things like postcards are good for other things. It can be community building and cathartic. But they often aren't things that your member of Congress or their staff are going to pay a lot of attention to. So we sort of created a hierarchy, right, of town halls and other local events like ribbon cuttings and other things where your member might show up, local district office visits, and then also coordinated calls. So this wasn't complicated, and this is a lot of stuff that other people knew and were doing. We just found a way to put it in front of a broader audience. And this is one of the people who helped crash our Google Doc, Robert Reich, who's great. And I don't even know how he found it. He, like, for a lot of this stuff, we just kind of were like, I don't know how the hell people found any of this stuff. He's also been a huge help to us. He's done a lot of promotion for us sort of over the last few months. He's shot a bunch of videos with us. He's been wonderful, but we don't know how he found it or have found us. But he just one day called Ezra, I think, and said, I want to do whatever you want. So people like him. Also, like Leonardo DiCaprio has been, we don't know how, again, like a huge supporter. And I just got married in June, and my wife has already told me, she does some stuff with Indivisible, but she's a dentist, so she's on the side, I think, a little bit for some of this stuff. But she's already told me if Leo ever does an event with us that like that's the end of our marriage because she's running away with him whether he wants to or not. And I never thought that would be possible, but now it seems like it might actually happen. So Indivisible's been good and bad for me. And so a couple days later, so as we launched this Google Doc that crashed in about 14 hours, we all sort of looked around and said, oh my God, like this is not a thing we ever expected to be important to anyone other than ourselves. And we got to work a couple days later trying to figure out ways to keep this thing going and to make what's turned into sort of an accidental nonprofit into an organization that could live on and play a role in organizing and channeling the resistance. Not that we even really knew what that meant at the time. And some of these dates, some of this stuff is outdated. I'll get to some updated numbers here in a second. But I mean, in the 2 weeks that our site was up, we had 1 million or so downloads of the guide, which is crazy to think about. Coming in from academia, I often joke or commiserate, I think, that this guide is probably the most read thing I'll ever write. Like, no one's ever going to read the journal article I got out last year, but they're going to read this guide a bunch. So I've peaked at like 32. And so this is our new website. So one of the other things we've done is transition from a 501c4 to also having a C3, and that meant we qualified to be a .org. But I'm showing you this because I'm going to talk about a couple of the functions on here that are particularly important. Has everybody here been to the site before? Raise your hand if you've been to the site. Oh, so well, a lot of you. So I'm going to fulfill my fiduciary responsibility to Indivisible by asking you to pull out your phones and type in indivisibleguide.org. So I'm going to give you a second to do that, and it'll take you to a page like this. And one of the reasons why we wanted to migrate to this new site is because it gave us all kinds of new things to play around with. One of which is this thing, if you scroll just a little bit, called This Week's Actions. So we get asked a lot, like, how do you decide where to focus people's energy and efforts, and what's that process look like? And we have a whole like sub-guide that explains what that looks like. But the short version is that we spend kind of an embarrassing amount of time just winnowing down the things we think are going to have the most impact during the week that we're sending this out. And that's because our entire theory of change is premised on the idea that Donald Trump needs Congress to do almost everything he wants to do. There are lots of terrible things he can do by himself, but because he's like unrestrained and on Twitter more than I am, most of that stuff gets overturned eventually. All of the big things he wants to do, from healthcare to tax reform, to most of the things he wants to do with the visa program in this country, to CHIP, to pretty much everything else, and even the Mueller investigation, he needs Congress for. And we know we can change enough minds in Congress or create the conditions to replace bad members later if we organize around issues strategically. And for those of you who've spent time in DC, you know members of Congress and their staff only care about what's on their desks that day and maybe that week. And so while we like to get involved in other movement building stuff, and we do from time to time, we're often very tactical, right? So we're worrying about the issue that's on their desk that day or that week, and then we do other things to lift up other issues as they come up. And they all have their own little microsite like this. So the big thing that we're pushing on now is the tax scam, well, what we're calling tax scam. So you can go there. We'll have a calculator tomorrow so you can actually go in and enter all of your info, and it'll tell you how much or how this plan will actually affect you. But so these are our groups, and like Ananya said, we have 6,000 now ish across the country. That's good and bad. Like it's a good number to just say like we have 6,000, but it's also like way too many to manage. And some of our groups in other places have started. Am I like messing up the camera to move around like that? Okay. I sometimes pace when I do this stuff. That's a lot to manage. 6,000 groups is a lot. And some of our groups in other places, including Kansas City, where Hillary Shields sort of came up and is now running for office, have have already started to consolidate. So they've gone from like 40 groups to 2. Northwest Arkansas, Ozark Indivisible has done the same thing for a constellation of groups there. And we're starting to think about now how we do that across the whole country. So maybe 6,000 isn't the number we'll have in a year. Maybe it'll be more like 2,500 or 4,000. We're not sure. But we know it's too many. And so if you were to go back to our website and enter your zip code in, it would give you a map like this. So these are all of our groups in LA. You can see they're actually geographically located. If you hover over them, it'll show you, essentially what you're seeing here, which is their name, if they have a website, if they have a Facebook page, if they have a Twitter account, if they have an email address. And we wanted to do this because we always thought about, like, when we were putting all of this together, folks in our families and how they might use this. So my parents, who I think are the people that you would say are like prototypical of our members. They vote in every election, but they probably haven't ever done anything activism or advocacy-wise, and now we're like dying to do it all the time. We wanted to give them the easiest interface possible for doing this, and so this is, we'd always, I would literally send test pages of this to my mom and be like, can you figure out how to use this? And they've worked like half the time, but yeah, so this is where we are now. This is how you can find a group if you're not already in one. And actually, I won't go back because I'm not sure how to do that, but what I would say is that one of the other things we were careful to do at the beginning is not to worry too much about branding. So you see lots of groups on that list who don't have Indivisible in their name, which we don't care about. Like, we'd rather have the groups and be able to like mobilize people around issues however they want to identify. If they want to be in an Indivisible chapter, that's cool. If not, like, we don't care. We just want as many people pushing in the same direction as is possible. And I won't talk a whole lot about this except to say that, like, some of the numbers here are like unbelievable for us. To have 6,000 groups, to have several million people who are like using this site, and we know are calling and doing all the other things that people need to do to push back against Donald Trump, is like it's the thing that keeps us going. One of the weird things about like my relationship with Indivisible now is that pretty much everyone else who helped write the guide has like quit their job to do it full time. So if you look at like Ezra and Leah were both at other like very well established progressive organizations and think tanks. Lots of the other folks who are with us now were in the same position and have given all that up to do this. I wasn't going to quit my job at Penn to do it full time, also because I'd just taken it, so that felt kind of wrong. But they let me do things like this whenever I want, and also I still help run some of our social accounts and some of our policy stuff. So it's weird to be kind of an inside and outside person and see all of those guys come into it full time. And I want to go back to Ananya's nerd comment earlier too, because one of the funny things about all the people who helped start this is that it's like the nerdiest collection of people in the world. And I mean that in a good way, because I'm a nerd and I love nerds. And they're also weirdly mostly from the South, which is I don't understand. And I'm from Arkansas and I don't get it. But if you look at Ezra, like the evolution of his Twitter timeline, he went from like sending out like talking points from CFED, where he used to work, about domestic poverty policy, to like now he's just trolling Donald Trump on Twitter. It's like one of the things we give him a really hard time for. So I'm going to show you, this is a really old video now. It feels weird to say really old. It was from February, I think, or March, which feels like it was like a decade ago. But this is one of the first promotional videos we put together for like how to use the guide. So all the numbers are going to be wrong, but the tactics are mostly the same.
If you're like me, you've been pretty freaked out about Trump and his agenda. Good news. Smart people with tons of experience in how politics really work have put together a practical guide on how to make Congress listen to us that you can find at indivisibleguide.com. Members of Congress only care about their constituents, and that means you. You will have 3 simple targets: your 2 U.S. senators and your representative. You will let them know how you feel about every important issue that comes up. But a warning, it's going to require a little more than just calls and petitions. This all begins when you join a local group or start your own. Once you're part of a team, there are 4 simple tactics to engage in. Town halls. Members of Congress will hold them. You just have to show up and use the public comment sections to voice your opinion. Public events. Your members of Congress will be out there cutting ribbons and kissing babies. You need to be there asking the smart questions and holding them accountable to issues they are on the wrong side of, or thanking them for being on the right side in hard times. Office visits. Members of Congress take meetings, schedule one, or just show up and bring some friends. Let them know you care, you vote, and you are watching them. Call them. Work with local groups to participate in mass call days so your members of Congress can't ignore their constant ringing phones and full voicemail boxes. Over 500,000 individuals have already downloaded the guide. Over 100,000 people have signed up in every congressional district in the country, and over 3,000 groups have registered in every state in the nation. This is needed even if your senators and representatives are on the right side of the issues, because we have to embolden them and show them that they have solid ground support. Pretty simple, right? 3 targets, 4 tactics. The hard part is that it's not about doing it once and then calling it a day. To make this work, we all need to be in this for the long haul. A real resistance movement is a marathon, not a sprint. Go to indivisibleguide.com and sign up to join the movement that will win. Read the guide, share it, and let's get to work.
So I'll say too, one of the 6,000 groups number sounds cool, but like the one I like the most is that we have at least 2 in every congressional district in the whole country, so all 435. There's one district, and I can't remember which one it is now, in like Central California that only has 2, and our average is like 18.5 in every congressional district. That's like that to me is like one of the funner things about all of this, is that it's very clearly spread very quickly in every corner of the country. That map I showed at the beginning can be a little misleading, right? Because it shows a big cluster in the coast. We're actually all over the entire country. So I'm going to talk a little bit. One of the things that I always try to do in one of these talks is to go back to some of the like Civics 101 stuff that's in the guide, because I have a captive audience, and so you can leave, but like I'm going to notice, and I'm probably going to make fun of you if you leave. And so let's go. If we talk about, we just saw in the video, one of the first things we ask our groups to do, right, is how to set up a meeting with a member of Congress and MOC. There's a couple really simple steps, right? So one is that if you go to a website called Legistorm, you can find every staffer for your member of Congress that's on the books, that ever has been on the books. So you always want to focus on their communications director or press secretary, their chief of staff, and or their scheduler. This involves being a little creepy. So once you have that, you know, in the House and the Senate, they all use the same format, right? So when Steve Bannon goes to be chief of staff for Donald Trump Jr. in a few years, his email address would be steve.bannon@mail.house.gov. And when that Trump went to work for Bannon in the Senate, it would all be first name -- last name @member.senate.gov. So they all use this. It's not hard to find out how to get in touch with who you want to talk to, and how to get or who they are and how to get in touch with them. So once you set that up, let's say one of the things you ask them for, you have a terrible member like Darrell Issa who won't hold a town hall. And so that's one of the asks you want to make in your meeting. And that's one of the other pieces in the guide, right, is you always have a hard ask of your member. So what to do, let's say Congressman Issa decided to hold a town hall. The obvious one, right, is to prepare, and so we have lots of resources on our site for that now. In addition to the guide and the sort of weekly action stuff that I just sort of showed you, we have like 2,500 other resources there that range from like how to hold a good town hall to like what is budget reconciliation. I can't believe people want to know what budget reconciliation is, but they're really eager to find out, so we wrote an explainer on it. But we do have this whole thing for town halls as well. So one of the ways you find out where their town hall might be is to go to one of our great partners, which is Town Hall Project, or to just sign up for like all of the listservs where they might pump that information out, right? Like your local chamber, your county Republican Party, whoever that might be. And then tell everyone we have basically shell press advisory stuff in there if you were to find out when and where it is for how to pump that stuff out. And then obviously these are like, again, pretty basic. Hold a preparatory meeting and have a media strategy for your event. So by media strategy, we mean, right, like have an event hashtag, have someone who's taking photos, have someone who's taking video, have a press list you can distribute all this stuff to before and after. And once you get there, then, right, like your job is to be really strategic. So get there early and get organized. Members will often hold town halls at like 11 o'clock on a Tuesday morning because they don't want you to show up. So that's a hard situation to navigate, but if you are able to get people there, one of the things we recommend you do is you get there early, you spread out, and then you also bring voter registration forms. Because if I were Congressman Issa and Ananya had a group here asking me questions I didn't want to answer, and they were all clustered together, it'd be really easy for me to just never turn to her again, right? I could just turn to the people in the crowd that were really friendly. But if you're spread out, they obviously can't do that. This is like a weird thing that started happening. So the way most of our resources get developed is that our groups are way smarter than us. So they come up with a good idea, and then we figure out how to get it in front of all of our other groups. And so in our town hall doc, one of the things we recommend people do now when they like inevitably make you say the Pledge of Allegiance at your town hall is to shout indivisible at the end, so they know you're like in the house and ready to like hold them accountable. We had a group, I can't remember where they were now, it was either Colorado or Utah who did this, and we don't know why they decided to do it, but it was so cool we decided to have all of our other groups do it. And then again, like this is pretty basic, right? Ask your questions and don't, if you get handed the mic, don't give it back until you get an answer, which some groups are very good at. There's a suburban congressman in PA who has some really unfortunate video and is probably not going to seek re-election as a result of that and some other things, of him like wrestling with an elderly man to try and get the microphone back. I have lots of stories about congressmen like that. And to show your approval and disapproval, right? So if you've seen the phenomenon of like green and red signs showing up at all of these town halls, or like thumbs up and thumbs down stuff, most of that started with our groups. So if you look at the Salt Lake City group that was at the first Chaffetz town hall, who also condemned him to retirement, at least temporarily from politics, which is awesome. We have a running list now of like 10 or 12 members of Congress who we know have retired because of our groups, because they say so in their press releases when they announce their retirement. It's like the best feeling in the world. But it's because our groups have been doing stuff like this and holding them accountable. And I think I just had in there that pettiness is encouraged. I don't know if that's like a formal position of Indivisible, but I'm very petty, so I'm always up for petty things at town halls. And then lastly, just get back to work afterwards. So we have this should say .org there now, but we have an inbox where we ask groups to send us, good clips and video and pictures from stuff like this. One of the reasons we do that is because we curate a list of content, sort of every day that goes on to people like the Rachel Maddow Show, Chris Hayes, all the other folks who have been really good about lifting up our groups across the country. And the best stuff makes it in there. And I think almost every night since the election, they've been good about showcasing some of our groups across the country. And then, of course, like one town hall isn't enough. So I'm going to show a clip. I warned you earlier, I'm going to talk about Tom Cotton a lot. Here's one from his town hall in February, which is the first one he'd ever held as a member of Congress. And he'd been there since 2012. And one of the things you realize when someone who's like already not good with human interaction holds a town hall for the first time in like 5 years, they're really bad at it. So this is like not even the worst exchange from that town hall.
You talk a lot about the repeal, but you have not gone into specifics on replacements. So my question is, will you commit today to replacement protections for those Arkansans like me who will die or lose their quality of life or otherwise be unable to be participating citizens trying to get their part of the American dream? Will you commit to replacements in the same way that you committed to the repeal?
It gets better.
Thank you, Katie. Let's take a couple more comments or questions about that.
So it's hard to see in this clip, but the woman who asked that question is Katie McFarland. She's 22 or 23, living in Northwest Arkansas. No, I realize there's so much more left. Me. He just kind of flounders around for a while after that. But she's 22 or 23, living in Northwest Arkansas. She's on disability and Social Security from her parents. She's permanently disabled. She's a huge activist for ADAPT now, but was new to all of this before, really before that town hall. And so for someone like, for a sitting U.S. Senator to look like a young person like that in the face after that question, which is a question that anyone should be able to answer, right? Like, are you willing to commit to replacing this thing you've like publicly stated you're committed to repealing? To just say like, thanks for your question or comment and move on is like viscerally disgusting, right? And so it's the first time in 5-ish years of holding public office in Arkansas that Tom Cotton's ever gotten a negative headline. He's one of those young members of Congress who, like, especially the national press, have been like fawning over for as long as he's been in office and are now like coming to terms with the fact that he's terrible, which everyone in Arkansas has known forever. There was a great profile of him from Jeffrey Toobin in the New Yorker this week, which you should all read, because it's talking about his positioning himself to run for president in a few years. And and so when I talk about the work that our groups do, we often sort of frame it as doing one of two things. One of which is making members of Congress better. So that includes getting Republican members to vote the way we'd want them to vote, but also making B or B plus Democrats become A Democrats, right? And do all the things we want instead of just most of the things we want. But the other is that all of this work creates the conditions down the road to replace terrible members of Congress. And again, I don't think this is like a thing that I could say is like an official indivisible position, but just as like a human from Arkansas, that I hope that our groups there find a way to do that for Tom Cotton. He's not up till 2020 though. But something pretty incredible happened after that town hall. So Senator Cotton, who's only ever run on one thing in his whole life, and that's repealing Obamacare, was the person who killed the first version of Trump Care in the Senate. He put out this little tweet storm and then did a week of press on how bad the bill was. Saying we can't pass this bill without major changes, we should slow down. He lied about what Democrats did with Obamacare, but then also said we can't release it on a Monday and then vote on a Wednesday, which is a totally reasonable thing to say, but like no one else in the Republican caucus had enough courage to say. And he only had it after he got shamed at this event. And that what matters in the long run, he's like at this point just kind of trying to grandstand a little bit. But that's the thing that Tom Cotton never does without our groups. There is no way, and he's one of 20 or so members who we could say that with full confidence in. They've taken positions this year they would have never taken without our groups. He's since I think walked back. We've been a little less excited about how he's felt about Trump Care since then, but to this day, Trump Care is mostly dead and Obamacare is alive because our groups and lots of other groups like them beat $1 billion 8-year machine to dismantle our nation's healthcare system. And it's not perfect, but it's better than what they wanted. So one of the things that happens when members like Tom Cotton hold a town hall and get crushed like he did is they stop holding them. Or they hold what we call sham town halls, right? So someone like Dave Bratt in Virginia does this a lot. He'll make you submit questions on like index cards before the town hall, and then he'll kind of like act like he's flipping through all of them, but really his staff has flagged the ones he's supposed to read for him. So there are things like, why are you so great, Dave? Love your wife. Like they're just not, they're total like piece of something. So we wrote a sham town hall guide as well. So what is a sham? A thing that's not like it's supposed to be. It's Trump University. So there's Dave Bratt again. One of the things, I don't know if I put the joke in here or not. Oh yeah, I think it's at the bottom of this, but one of the other things I try to do on most of the resources we write is insert a lot of bad jokes and then hope no one catches them. And this is one where like no one caught it. So I think it might be at the bottom of this slide, but if it's not, it was something like, why would you want to tell a town hall? Well, let me see if it's in here because it's going to be better than me trying to remember it. Oh yeah. So your member of Congress can do anything during a tele-town hall. Are they streaming reruns of Lost? Are they making anagrams out of Donald Trump on the back of a napkin? Are they wearing their pajamas? Nobody knows. And I say that because I do know staffers who work for members of Congress who actually wore their pajamas to tele-town halls. One of the reasons they're terrible, right, is that you can screen out all the questions you want, right? So the way that it works is you call in, there's a whatever software they're going to use to help them collect calls and order them and prioritize them for the member of Congress. And if you have a question to ask that they don't want to answer, you just never get through to the member of Congress. And also, when you do get questions, and occasionally they try to insert like a challenging one in there, they're being fed briefing binders the entire time, right? So if your member of Congress seems like extraordinarily smart on all these issues and like never does outside of a tele-town hall, it's because their staff is handing them briefing binders as questions are coming up so that they can talk about healthcare and veterans affairs and immigration all seamlessly without anyone noticing. That's why they don't want to do it in public, because they don't really know most of this stuff. So we also had a couple of things that we would tell folks to do during a tele town hall, right? Which is one, to like always counter program it. So a good way to take attention away from it is to have your own event. One of the things our group started doing was adopt a district town halls, right? Where like a good member of Congress who was willing to talk to humans would come and do that, and then the other person would do, your actual member would do whatever they would want to do with the tele town hall. And then if you do call in, if you decide you want to participate in it, to be warm, polite, and vague, to try and beat the screen, right? So you don't want to lie about the question you're going to ask, but it's also pretty easy to beat a screener. It's going to be like a 22-year-old intern for the member of Congress who's probably there because like their parent is a donor, and so it's not that hard to get through. And then compile all the questions you wanted to ask and then share them widely. So if you don't get through by being warm, polite, and vague, you can still get your question in a press release and have it written about later. And that goes back to our whole theory of change, is that you're trying to change the way your member of Congress is framed and perceived and how their power is built through media, through the local press. And this is I don't know if you can see it that well, this is a chicken. I don't know if this is because I grew up like near a chicken farm in Arkansas that I love this so much, but there's a group in Michigan that I'll talk about in just a second who had a member of Congress, Dave Trott, who also had never held a town hall. And so this was what they did for a missing member town hall. They didn't invite like a good member of Congress from elsewhere. They just got a chicken and put it at a podium and put a name tag on it that said Dave Trott, and then did whatever they were going to do. The chicken's name is Henny Penny. I've been trying to make our next merch round include the chicken, but I don't know if that's really going to happen. And so our groups also started doing stuff like this, which was really fun. So again, like our groups figure out all of this stuff way before we do. This is an idea that one of the groups here in California put together, and that other groups have done all over the country. One of the ways that I knew this was happening, in addition to Twitter, was that I went to buy milk at my corner store in Philly, and Pat Toomey's face was on the milk that I bought because he also had never held a town hall. So the other thing to do is like so let's say you've met with your member of Congress, you've shamed them into a town hall, you crushed them at the town hall, now they're doing tele-town halls because they're scared of you, and then they just ghost on you. So they just stop responding to what you want to do. So what do your options look like then? One, again, I said it at the beginning, you have to be a little creepy. So go back and like look through their social feeds, get on any email listserv you think they might be sending info out through, and figure out where they're going to be and go to a public event and get your question answered, right? Because the things that you want to ask them are not outrageous, they're not, ridiculous. They're things that everyone deserves an answer to. If you have a question for your member of Congress, you should be able to get that question answered. And so if they won't do it in a public setting at a town hall, then go wherever they are, meet them at the ribbon cutting they're going to, and get your question answered. So mailing lists, you can also schedule your own town halls and invite them. So this is the group in Michigan. This is Henny Penny. This is the Michigan 11th. So a really great thing happened with Dave Trott too, because eventually they held enough of these Henny Penny town halls that he decided to hold a real one. And again, I mentioned at the beginning, for members of Congress who are a little who struggle with humanity and interacting with it, they also, I think, have a really hard time acclimating themselves to a setting like, say, this, if they've never done it or if they haven't done it in a long time. And so Dave Trott held one of these back in, I think, May or June during one of the summer recess periods, and forgot all of the things about how a town hall works, including that a microphone is attached to you and isn't necessarily off when it's attached to you. And he got crushed at the town hall because he gave a bunch of terrible answers, and then went backstage with his mic still hot and told his staff, okay, now let's go cut this video and make it look like they're booing veterans and send it to Fox. And he said that with CNN there taping, MSNBC there taping, the New York Times, the Atlantic, all covering the event. And so that was it. He's not running for re-election anymore. It's an open seat. That series of events by our Michigan 11 chapter took him out of Congress. And we don't know if we're going to win that seat, but we know whoever is in it next is going to be better than him. If for no other reason, then they'll probably actually interact with humans. So a question we get asked a lot, right, is does any of this matter? And there are some obvious ways it does, right? People like Dave Trott are no longer in Congress. And there are real meaningful ways from a policy perspective that it matters too. The most obvious of which is that our healthcare system has not been gutted, even though we still haven't found a way to reauthorize CHIP, Children's Health Insurance Program for the non-nerds in the room. But there's also like a fun way in which it matters, in which we know all of this is driving Donald Trump crazy because he tweets about it every day. These are a little old, right? But this is like the wonderful thing about him on Twitter is that he lets you know exactly what he's feeling, and he has lots of feels about all of you resisting him. I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are like old and kind of hilarious, and he sends one like this out a week probably. And you can tell when he's in all caps, he's really mad. But I have this one in here too, because it's my favorite like criticism of us, is that like all of our groups, all 6,000 of them and every member in it is a paid protester, which was said by Wayne LaPierre, who's like the richest lobbyist in the world, and is a shill for the NRA. And he threw out at CPAC that every member of Indivisible is paid $1,500 a week, which sounds great, but like if he wants to send a check, he can. But that's 6,000 groups. That's like at minimum 100 people per group. And I forget what the number would be now, but when I did a talk like this about a month ago, that figure was like around $5.5 billion. So, I mean, the only, like, one, like, that's insane, right? We like, haven't even raised, like, a percentage point of that. And the other is that if Wayne does want us to pay our people, he can write a check for $5.5 billion and send it to us, and maybe we will. Oh, yeah. And there's just one, too, right? One of the great things about all of this work and all of this organizing that we've started to invest in and see achieve some real big wins for us is that it is splitting apart all of the factions in the Republican Party that he needs to govern, right? It's hard to, the Freedom Caucus was always a problem for Republicans in the House, but they're even more of a problem now because they're not worried about general elections, but everyone else in the House is. And for the first time in 8 years, most Republicans in the House are worried about a general election, and it's because of all the new activism and organizing. And I'm going to go through a couple images here from our groups, and then I'm going to start to wind down and move us into a discussion. But one of the things that we had people do around the healthcare vote, I think the third time, whatever, like Trump Care version 3 or 4, this was going on. We did die-ins. And I have this one up here. I didn't have a good picture of the group I'm going to say something about, but we had a group in Missouri, and I think it was like Southeast Missouri, who, after they had their die-in, held a press conference, and one of their members decided to do it in character as the Grim Reaper. So they put on the Grim Reaper suit and held a press conference about how great the Trump Care bill was, which was like my favorite action any of our groups have ever done. And then also in Texas, like our groups have been unbelievable in pushing out another terrible member of Congress, Lamar Smith. For those of you who don't know Lamar Smith, consider yourself lucky. He's like one of the people, along with Louis Gohmert in Texas, whose like entire political identity is wrapped up in the idea of what they would call like anchor babies, like the racist term they attach to immigrants and children in this country. He's not running for re-election because he's terrified of a general election there. And there's no way that happens without our groups pushing him. This one I put in here because it actually also connects back to California. Does anybody here have Dela is their member of Congress? Your rep? No? I know he's SoCal, but he may be too far from here. So I mentioned at the beginning he'd never held a town hall, or at least not in the last 8 years. But he goes to a lot of fundraisers. So the groups here did what we recommended, right? They signed up for their local Chamber of Congress listserv and found out that Congressman Issa would be in Florida on a yacht for a fundraiser in May, and coordinated with one of our groups in Tampa to develop or to create a kayak flotilla and to surround his boat and to keep it from moving and to videotape it all and to ask him all the questions they wanted to ask. And he like weirdly engaged with them. And this is right before he came back and he got that really weird picture of him like peering over the roof at all the activists, which I like contribute to them. I don't know if that's fair, but I think they caused a little break for him by doing that. We have all kinds of weird stories too like that where our groups have coordinated across the country to hold members accountable that they can't find. This is another group in Fargo, North Dakota of all places. And I have them in here because this is a group of about 3,000 people in Fargo, Indivisible, North Dakota, who like drive hours at a time every other week to spend time together and to plan and to strategize and to organize around actions and events and all kinds of other things. And I know if a place like North Dakota can do this, anywhere in the country can. My brother lives in, or used to live in North Dakota. I think he's in this picture somewhere. And of course, like, this is at the Cotton Town Hall in Arkansas. I warned you I'm going to talk about Arkansas and in Indiana. So that's a really quick overview of our groups, but I wanted to show this slide too because it's a little bit about what we're going to do next. And there are sort of 2 or 3 phases for what we think our future plans are going to look like. If you look at like our evolution in terms of where we've invested, the money we've raised, and how we've staffed up over the last few months, the first priority was to hire organizers to go live and work in the places where our groups work and to help them build up whatever power and capacity they need to do whatever it is they want to do for the next year or 2 or 3. The next was to build up our policy team so that we could start preparing for all the big fights that are going to come down the road once we got past the healthcare and tax reform fights, which we know are coming, but we haven't had to wait yet. The third was to invest in elections. And we were incredibly lucky to get Marty Urbina, who was here in California and Nevada and Utah, was Harry Reid's top political operative. It's one of the only reasons he won re-election in 2012 and helped build Voto Latino into the power that it is, and is now doing the same, we hope, for us. One of the cool things about being in the position we're in is that we've been able to hire and work with people who are way smarter, way more accomplished, and way better at this than we are, and Mari is one of those people, and she's building up what we're calling Indivisible 435, which is our plan to play in every single congressional district in the country. One of the things that we underscore a lot, but especially in our political activity, is that while we agree with a lot of the planks of the Democratic Party, we're not an official wing, right? Like, we're our own outside group that pushes them to be better. And one of the ways we can do that is playing around in districts that they have no interest in playing around in. And for a kid who grew up poor in rural Arkansas, that's really exciting for me. The other thing, and I will have a slide for this, that we're starting to do, and this is in direct response to something our groups have continuously raised to us, is to think about how we replicate the success we've had in Congress at the state house level, right? So how do you influence state legislatures in the way that we've been able to influence Congress? And that's a lot trickier. We pushed back against that for a long time and said, like, that's 50 states. Like, I don't even know, like, how all of those are put together, let alone how to intercede in them. But we heard it enough that that's what our next round of sort of staffing and investment is going to look like. It's going to be in how to translate some of this power and capacity that we've built into all the fights that are going on in state legislatures around the country, where Republicans have decimated state budgets, they've decimated access to opportunity, and they've killed like the entire justice system in most of these countries. And it's one of the more exciting things to me about what our future might hold, is what this might look like to have like a state version of Indivisible in, say, California or Texas or New York or wherever. And I'll just end with this slide. And I'm gonna steal from like one of my favorite people in the world, Roxane Gay, who gave a talk about this same set of issues in Philly a few weeks ago. And if you don't know Roxane Gay, you should. Like, she's brilliant and like one of the most impressive people I think I've ever heard speak and met in my life. But she looked out at us in Philly and said, you know, the idea of America as a place where people can come together and, you know, work towards justice and equality and opportunity is possible, but it's not inevitable. It takes all of our work today and forever to make the promise and the idea of this country come to fruition. So with that, I want to thank you again for having me here, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Billy, again. And now I'd like to invite our discussants, that sounds very formal, but our discussants to get us started with some questions and conversation. So Melanie, may we start with you?
So I just wanted to thank Indivisible for creating this platform. And I mean, it's such an example of how information, when it goes viral, can be powerful and impactful, and you know, how it's a much needed resources for those of us trying to work at the grassroots and the grass tops levels. I think One of the questions I have is, as researchers here at the university, we try to, and those of us trying to do community-based participatory research, we're trying to translate information into information that could be used by resistance movements. So what is what kind of thinking that you all have, at Indivisible on how to accomplish those connections?
I think for us, we think about it as being a fairly simple proposition. It's hard work, but it's about investing in community organizing in a way that the Democratic Party hasn't done in a generation, and that lots of other groups in the mainstream progressive world haven't done in a really long time. So, in the broader progressive movement, there are all kinds of person of color-led groups who've been doing this work for a really long time, and I think have been waiting for the opportunity or the moment when we'd have the kind of energy and numbers that we have now, right? And our biggest challenge is now figuring out how to take all of our new members who are they're older, they're whiter than the progressive movement as a whole, and how to get them up to speed on what's been going on, right, for the last 20, 30 years in the progressive movement, and how to channel all of that energy and all of that excitement and all of those numbers into winning on the things that all of those other groups have been working on for a long time. So that's a really, it sounds much simpler and easy than it is. It's really hard work, and you all know that better than I do. But I think that's the challenge and opportunity we see for ourselves now, is we have this army of really eager folks who are ready to do some work. And we have a chance now to catch them up on all the things they need to know to be good members and good allies in that fight.
Okay. Ava.
Hi, everybody. Congratulations, and let me turn this on. Hello. Congratulations. I was thrilled when I found out that one of the founders was a planner and did such a great project that in many ways is simple, right? There's a simple message and a simple process, and it makes democracy, I suppose, more accessible. That was certainly part of the Tea Party's formation. But then I started thinking about all of the other factors that enabled the Tea Party, including messaging, the far right, the conspiracy theories, and of course that was something that really struck me throughout the campaign, then of course on November 8th when we all had this big hangover. And I quickly started thinking about my own role at the university, and my fear was that the far right was going to come and attack institutes and research centers and faculty and students who undertake these sorts of basic roles, right? And so I'm wondering, to what extent is Indivisible worried about that sort of trolling and alt-right sort of guerrilla tactics that were so successful in this past election and really lifted up a good part of the Tea Party. I mean, we can't think of them as a separate, simple organizing tactic. It was hugely successful, and so I think it's more complicated than that, and sometimes that message can be lost. So I'd like you to comment a little on that.
Yeah, I think there are sort of two responses or two buckets of things that we're talking about. One of which is just the trolls in general, who we don't worry a lot about. Some of the things are kind of fun, actually. So one of the Newsmax, which is one of the worst conservative publications in the world, were one of the first conservative outlets to write about us, and wrote an expose, I guess probably in February, or they called it an expose. It was all caps headline, and it was found secret Obama Clinton guide to resisting Donald Trump, and they cited where they found it, and it was our website, and they listed all the people they found out through investigative reporting had worked on it, and it was the bio list or the author list on the guide. So that's framed in our office. So there's stuff like that that's fun, but then all of the other stuff, the ecosystem of propaganda and hate and what I assume is Alex Jones just constantly ripping his shirt off to an audience of tinfoil hatted people. That's terrifying because it works, right? And especially when it's propped up and propagated by a foreign adversary like Russia. So yeah, I mean, I don't think we have a good plan for how to deal with that. I don't think anybody does. And that's the thing that keeps us up at night. It's the reason why, however hopeful we are about elections tonight and in 2018 and 20, I think that it's very measured and tempered by the fact that we don't have the same ecosystem on the left, right? We don't have a constellation of conservative news outlets that will prop up any story we want propped up and send it out to an audience of millions of folks who are very easily influenced by it. It might be their only way to get information. I don't have a good answer for that one, other than I'm a little scared.
And are you going after moderate and conservative Democrats? I haven't followed
Yeah.
that, but I'm wondering if you are.
So,
B+ ones?
yeah,
Yes,
the B+ ones. Yeah, we will. I think at times, right? I think we're not refusing to play around in primaries, and we had really strong or very heated conversations about that in the early days, and we still have them about it because there are primaries we won't play in. Like we're not going to play around in the West Virginia Senate primary, but other people will, and I think that's great. Like I think a healthy primary system is the only way you get the candidates you want and deserve. And every incumbent who faces a challenger should be able to do that openly, and there should never be a situation where it feels like the party or groups like ours are picking the nominees, because that's not the way this is supposed to work.
Yeah, it's kind of a follow-up question about the Tea Party, because I think what is very striking in the Indivisible is that you kept the structure of the Tea Party and obviously not the content.
Yeah.
And probably many people think that the success of the Tea Party relied on their outrageous comments, right?
Mm-hmm.
While it was basically structural, and that you got that, and it was a bold move because it was, unexpected in a way. There is another thing that I think very striking and probably a little bit worrisome in a way, is that now, to put it very quickly, democracy becomes almost contradictory to political parties. There is something that is called democracy, and something else called political parties. In a way, Donald Trump got that because he was the leader of a movement, much more than a candidate of a party. Yeah. I know he didn't win the popular vote. That I know, but still he made it. So, and now do you think, in brief, that a movement like the Indivisible or Move On or other, movement like this, it's a new way of doing politics? Because we can also see that in Europe.
Yeah.
So it's not only in the United States. So do you have a broader view? I know it's a huge question, but do you have a broader view of this kind of a new way of doing politics?
Yeah, I think whether it results in like the dissolution of parties is like an open question, and I kind of doubt it, but I do think outside groups like ours or like Move On or Working Families or whoever exist and are newly empowered because all of our other institutions, party and otherwise, failed us, right? There'd be no Indivisible if those institutions had done what we need them to do in 2016 and for the 20, 30, 40 years before. So we now have an incredible opportunity to build up that infrastructure that parties can't or won't do. And I remember sitting on a panel sort of like this in Philly a couple weeks ago with a bunch of former state Democratic Party chairs who all bemoaned the rise of groups like ours because they were pulling money away from state parties, which I thought was hilarious and like really depressing, because I think that's probably where a lot of those party folks sit. But it was hilarious because like the argument for propping up those institutions in lieu of ones like ours, as if you couldn't have both, was that we were taking power away from a party that like had not earned the right to keep it. And I kind of chuckled at the idea that like we should be sending money to someone whose central argument for why you should give to them is that they want more money. Like that's a really like weird circular logic that I don't quite understand. And it's a part of the reason why we've worked so hard to try and temper the amount of control that money and donors have over us. So if you look at our fundraising guidelines on our website, there are caps for what any one person can give to us or what a foundation can give to us. And we did it because we didn't want either the perception or the reality of being controlled by the folks who control parties.
So I thought we'd take a couple of questions from the audience and then return to this conversation. Yes? All right. A bunch of hands. Do we want to use the mic? Or Martha?
Okay, so you said that I find this important, and it's true that Indivisible is working because all other institutions failed us. My question is the university one of the institutions that is failing us?
Yeah.
That's a simple answer. I was like, hold on on the answers. We'll just pass the mic around here and take a bunch of questions.
We can just do lightning round.
I know.
I was just surprised because you strike me as incredibly courageous. You find a lot of things that are scary, funny, and I was wondering when we asked you then about fascism, you're like, oh yeah, I am scared, and I was wondering of what strategies, for example, are you thinking of having a media outlet or making, or is it really that you're just that part we're not going to deal with, or I wanted to ask again.
Yeah, I mean, oh yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Kian Go. I teach here in urban planning. Thank you, Billy. Question that I think picks up on maybe what Melanie had started out with. So you're presenting this new sort of a reinvigorated movement around Congress, around members of Congress. And to me, it strikes me as like basically new claims on the state by either existing folks who might be active or in many cases new folks. And I was wondering if you could talk about the relationship between what you're trying to build here and other movements, social movements, community organizing movements by, let's say, groups that have not been able to count on the state even in the best of times. So like queer groups, like economic justice POC groups, and where they fit in. Are they being brought in, or are you reaching out, or how might that work?
One more question, and then I'm going to invite Billy and our other panelists to respond.
Hi, great talk. One thing that I was curious about, you talked a lot about resistance, but things usually work in polarity, and like you have this army of people sort of available to you, and wondering if you have thought of maybe reaching out to certain parties and kind of more education as opposed to resistance. I mean, both are necessary, but I don't know, something like that.
Thanks.
Just jump in. Well, I want to go back to Kian's question because I think that's really important, and that's I think I'm mic'd up. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Does this still work? I could just boom into both if you want. But that's if not the most important question, then one of the most important questions, right? Is how for good organizers, like it's about knowing when to step up and when to step back and let other groups be centered and lead. And for us, I think we've worked really hard to make sure that we do that around issues where, and that's just almost every issue where like movement building has been going on by mostly person of color led or LGBTQ-led groups for a really long time. And we've also been really proactive in trying to build up like our relationship with all of those groups. One of the, like Color of Change has been a big partner of ours on lots of things, but like the whole constellation of groups who work on like issues that we're fighting on have been doing it for a lot longer than most of us have even like been adults, right? Like Color of Change is like 10 or 12 years old now, I think, and has been in Philly for like longer than I have. And so for us, like we spend a lot of time thinking about and working on, ways to bring all of those parties together. And the nice thing about being like the new and like, I guess, cool group is that a lot of the tensions that prevented that from happening before, or a lot of the animosity amongst any of the groups that would have kept partners from working together before, have kind of gone away. And part of the reason is because of Donald Trump, right? Like he's an existential threat to all people everywhere, but he won't always be there, and we won't always be new and cool. So like we have to figure out how to build those relationships in a way and like build trust and share power and share resources in new ways because no one else is going to do it. And so we haven't figured out how to do it really well. That's the biggest hurdle for us in the next year or so, is figuring out how to be, for our movement, for our staff, for our partners, to be more representative of the progressive movement more broadly. Because we're not right now. We're like way too white. We're way too old to like actually have any claim on being leaders of anything in the resistance, because that's mostly again being done by people of color. But we're trying, like that's the thing we're spending the most amount of our time on now. And I forgot all the other questions.
Well, I wanted to invite our panelists to either answer these questions or pose new ones or engage. The university.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have your, where's your,
My case.
yeah? So, the university, yes.
Yeah. Of one of the institutions that failed,
Yeah.
they failed us.
Yeah, I mean, for way too long, universities have not been partners in the advocacy and like capacity building world in ways that this institute and hopefully UCLA more broadly are doing now and have been doing long before the election, but like, if I think about what faculty members, even at Penn, which is a private university and like isn't beholden to a state legislature in the way that a public university is, and should have the freedom to do almost anything it wants, it's been super timid, very disinterested in politics in general. And I say politics not just like about elections, like the actual organizing and capacity building and community building stuff that forms what we think of as politics. Been really disinterested in it for a long time as a university. It's been more of a real estate developer than a community partner, right? And universities have to do more. And for a place like UCLA to do it, way before us, is both heartening and disappointing. Like, I'm super excited and heartened by the work that y'all are doing here, and disappointed that it isn't happening at places where it should have happened first, which are private universities that have lots of money and no real political strings attached to it. So I hope that you'll model it for us and we can figure out a way to replicate it in Philly.
Well, you have a beautiful phrase for what has happened with tenured faculty and the university.
Anticipated obedience.
And we wanted to do this event to rupture that normalization. But I wanted to invite each of you to perhaps pose another set of questions or some comments.
Of course. Do you want to? Yeah. Okay. So I was also interested if you ever ordered an analysis, or do you have data about your success according to the color of the state? I mean, I guess your work is different in California and in Alabama. Mm-hmm. And how does it work according to the color of the state?
So we haven't done that yet. One of the things that, now that we're like fully staffed up, I think those are questions we're starting to wrestle with. But it literally until June or July, we had one person on staff, and that was Ezra. And we just weren't in a position to really do that kind of analysis. So I think we'll take a step back after the election tonight and kind of think about, this has been like a good pilot for us, because there aren't a ton of races tonight. It's a handful of states, right, and a handful of races where we think we can have an impact. And so that's where we feel like we have an opportunity to test a bunch of different get out the vote things and other tactics we're going to use to play around in elections, and then come back and actually build out a real program for 2018. But then we're also going to step back and look at how our groups across all of those different states are performing outside of elections, right? So, how are our groups evolving? Who's making calls? Who's showing up? Who's doing all the things we want our groups to do to move Congress? We have a lot of that data. We haven't had the capacity to really dig into it yet.
Thank you.
I wanted to mention how, well, I know that, Leah and Ezra, they made the number 2 on Politico's top 50 list, right?
Next to Steve Bannon.
Yeah, right. And so the co-founders, co-directors, right? And so, and I think you had mentioned earlier in your talk that you are curators of content, and for like Rachel Maddow's show and a lot of these, heavyweight, news anchors. And so I think that's a very invaluable role that you all play. And so I was wondering, are you seeing yourselves as the counter to Breitbart in many ways?
I hesitate to put myself in the same, or put us in the same sentence or conversation with them. But maybe, I don't know. I think we'll let other people tell us if that's how we actually are working. I think we're just interested in the moment in giving our groups all the things they need to be successful and being good partners in the resistance. And if it leads to something like that, that's great. And if it's just still like us doing this in Ezra and Lee's living room in a year because we've run out of money and power, then that's also fine.
Yeah, I mean, that access, because Black Lives Matter, Color Change doesn't have that same kind of access to media outlets. So
yeah. I mean, that's one instance where we have tried to, around Charlottesville and around some of the other stuff that's come since, where we were really heavily involved in a lot of the event planning and other actions that went into that, but those were absolutely led by BLM or Color of Change or local groups led by people of color who aren't affiliated with any of those organizations, where we've tried to do whatever we can to lift up the work. So we have a 250,000 people that follow us on social media, and we're always really cognizant about putting out good partner members' content, and a lot of that winds up making it into that sheet we send to Matt Hayes or whoever. Especially because because we have field organizers for the first time, are able to invest in in building a broader movement at the local level, right? Where our indivisible groups and BLM are working together and figuring out when it makes sense to work together and when to go their own way on certain stuff. And that means that we do have the opportunity to start lifting up other people's work who we either weren't aware of or just like didn't have the capacity to respond to before.
Just a comment, and then I'll yield to the audience. Any thoughts about doing some data sharing with universities to help you mine and try to make sense of some of the questions that were brought up? For example, different strategies between red and blue states. I think there could be a lot of partners who would work with you to do that.
Yeah, so I think the short answer is yes, of course, we'd be interested in that. There are a couple faculty members who I know we've already shared some of that data with. Some people just have to ask. If you want to talk about it after this, let's talk about it.
Urban planning capstone projects, public policy capstone projects, right? We're almost out of time, but I wanted to use my moderator's privilege and ask one last question. So you talked about 6,000 groups being too many, and yet you also told us these beautiful stories of these groups inventing new tactics, right, that no one else could have imagined. How does that come together? So is this a loosely knit federation? I mean, there's a particular model here of structure building and a political change.
Yeah, so I think when we talk about consolidation of groups, that's stuff that we're never going to push on people, right? We're not going to, for most of our model right is different from other organizations, even like Move On or Working Families, who I think are really into the like push model, and we're really into the like content model, and your group can figure out the best way to apply it because you're smarter and know your place better than we do. And that story is going to be the same for consolidation of our groups, right? Some of our groups have just done it without any guidance or resources from us because they felt it was the right thing to do, and that's cool, and some have not, and that's also cool. And I think what we're going to try to do going forward is just to give people, you know, the resources they need to like get through a consolidation process with the fewest headaches possible, because it's always going to be messy, and people are going to like want to know how power is shared when that happens, and that's an important thing to know about and to talk through. But it'll be modeled the same way all of our other content is modeled, right? Where we give it to our groups and let them figure out the best way to apply it.
So I want to thank Billy for being with us here on Election Day, and Abel, Laura, and Melanie. Please join me in thanking our speaker and our panelists.
Thanks for doing this.